El Salvador, a unique yet rarely discussed country on the international stage. This small Central American nation, rich with natural beauty, hides a miserable yet joyful history. Sadly though, not many people even have a basic understanding of this history. I seek to change that with the help of the iceberg. For those living under a rock, an iceberg is a chart that explains various topics in a single subject, from the well-known to the obscure and everything in between. This iceberg will explore the historical and cultural events and figures that have shaped the Salvadoran nation and people. Most of this iceberg is tame, but the last layer contains very disturbing and distressing episodes in the Salvadoran history, so viewer discretion is advised. If you would like to see more history and culture-centric content like this, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to join the Snoop Nation. Without further ado, let us delve into the El Salvador Iceberg Explained. El Salvador's name. The name El Salvador is Spanish for the Savior, in honor of Jesus Christ. It was given that name by the Spanish, led by Pedro de Alvarado. These conquistadors conquered the region from Mesoamerican tribes in the 1520s. It was then organized as a province of the Spanish Empire, where they established the capital city, San Salvador. Later, the name was extended to the grand title of the Province of Our Lord Jesus Christ, the Savior of the World. Once the province declared independence from Spain in the 1820s, El Salvador's independent rulers kept the name. Also, I'd like to note that the government of El Salvador prefers that all countries call them El Salvador, regardless if they're speaking Spanish or not, in a similar way to how Turkey and the Ivory Coast prefer that the international community use their name as pronounced in their languages. Nayib Bukele. Nayib Armando Bukele Ortez is the 43rd and current president of El Salvador, serving since June 2019. He's enjoyed the highest approval rating among all other leaders in the Americas and, internationally, has been known for his heavy-handed governing approach, social media antics, and efforts to promote the Bitcoin experiment in the country. Most Salvadorans view him as an effective leader in the fight against criminal gangs and the corrupt political establishment. Others in the minority, however, view Nayib Bukele as an authoritarian careerist steering the country towards dictatorship. Ultimately, opinions are very strong about this 42-year-old millennial statesman. If you would actually like to learn more about this figure, I actually published a documentary about President Nayib Bukele in January 2022, which I highly recommend you watch after this iceberg. It's one of my personal favorites. As of this recording, Bukele won re-election in February 2024 and began his second term in June 2024. We will continue to see Nayib deeper in this iceberg. Pupusas. Pupusas are the national dish of El Salvador, a thick tortilla made with cornmeal or rice flour, filled with cheese and or loroco. It could also be paired with chicharron, which is pork meat, beans, or shrimp. They are usually served alongside tomato salsa and pickled cabbage called curtido. The word pupusa derives from the word pupusawa, linked to the indigenous Pipil tribe that inhabited El Salvador before colonial times. Pupusas has since become a culinary, cultural, and economic staple of El Salvador.
I'm a pupusa man myself.
Oh, Salvadorian. Yeah. Okay. Let's Salvi here.
Better than tacos to me. I gotta go with them.
For instance, pupuseria restaurants are commonly found in countries containing large Salvadoran diaspora populations. My personal favorite kind of pupusa is pupusas de frijoles con queso, which are pupusas stuffed with cheese and refried beans. By the way, if you're gonna eat pupusas, don't even think about eating them with a fork. Just don't do it.
¿De qué país sos vos? ¿Y por qué te estás hartando con tenedor? Maje, qué vergüenza. Maje.
Bitcoin Law. The Bitcoin Law is a bill passed by the Salvadoran Legislative Assembly on the 8th of June 2021, which officially gave the Bitcoin cryptocurrency co-legal tender status alongside El Salvador's existing currency of the US dollar. This was a historic piece of legislation as it made El Salvador the first country on earth to implement the experimental decentralized currency on a national scale. It was first unveiled earlier that month by President Nayib Bukele, who unveiled his plans via a virtual presentation at the Bitcoin conference in Miami.
I will send to Congress a bill that will make Bitcoin a legal tender in El Salvador. In the short term, this will generate jobs and help provide financial inclusion to thousands outside the formal economy.
This had the international business and media world talking, with many arguing whether El Salvador was ready for an experiment of this magnitude. The law officially went into effect on the 7th of September 2021. The law introduced many ideas, including a state-run Bitcoin wallet app, which gave every Salvadoran $30 in Bitcoin, the ability for the government to mine Bitcoin through geothermal energy, or energy generated from volcanoes, and a volcano bond, which would fund the construction of a tax haven Bitcoin city in the east. To say that this law is controversial is an understatement. The decision has been widely criticized domestically and internationally, many citing the unreliable and risky nature of the cryptocurrency, the use of tax dollars to purchase Bitcoin, and the requirement of all business owners to accept usage of the currency. Advocates, on the other hand, feel that Bitcoin makes it easier for citizens to receive remittance payments, banking the unbanked, and diversifying the economy. Polls highlight that most Salvadorans do not use Bitcoin in their day-to-day lives, and many do not wish to. Do let me know in the comments down below if you are interested in a deep dive of the crypto experiment in El Salvador. MS-13. MS-13, or Mara Salvatrucha, is an international criminal gang formed by Salvadoran migrants in Los Angeles in the 1980s. They organized through trafficking, murder, money laundering, extortion, and kidnapping. Because many of these gang members were in the country illegally, the United States government began to deport them back to El Salvador. These mass deportations allowed MS-13 to export their reign of terror to the region. MS-13 is often pitted against rival gang Barrio 18, or the 18th Street Gang. MS-13 has become notorious for their sheer brutality, which in part influenced the candidacy and later administration of American President Donald Trump, who used the gang as an example of the dangers of mass immigration.
But MS-13 is particularly violent. They don't like shooting people because it's too quick, it's too fast. I was reading one of these animals was caught and explaining they like to knife them and cut them and let them die slowly because that way it's more painful and they enjoy watching that much more. These are animals.
For many years, MS-13 controlled many neighborhoods in the major cities in El Salvador where they ruled through terror and bloodshed. Globally, MS-13 has 50 to 70,000 members, operating mainly in the Americas. They are currently one of the major targets of a massive gang crackdown by Salvadoran authorities as of this recording. Salvadoran Civil War. The Salvadoran Civil War was a civil conflict fought in El Salvador from October 1979 to January 1992, fought between the US-backed Salvadoran military dictatorship and Soviet-backed communist rebels, also known as the Farabundo Martí National Liberation Front, or FMLN. The war began after a progressive faction of the military overthrew military president Carlos Humberto Romero in October 1979. The FMLN, with Soviet and Cuban support, swiftly launched an insurrection against the regime. Both sides were brutal in their conduct during the Civil War, with both sides committing kidnapping and utilizing child soldiers, torture, execution, and other various human rights abuses. The conflict quickly devolved into a late Cold War proxy war, with US President Ronald Reagan's administration vowing to eliminate communism in El Salvador.
If the Nazis during World War II and the Soviets today could recognize the Caribbean and Central America as vital to our interest, shouldn't we also? And I can tell you tonight, democracy is beginning to take root in El Salvador, which until a short time ago knew only dictatorship.
The war was truly destructive for the Salvadoran people, killing 80,000 of her own people. The war ended 12 years later with the signing of the Chapultepec Peace Accords in January 1992. We will continue to delve into chapters of this conflict throughout the iceberg. Mayan influence. The territory that is now El Salvador was once governed by Mesoamerican tribes with connections to the Mayans in southern Mexico. Western El Salvador was governed by the nomadic Pipil tribe, who named their homeland Cuscatlan, while the Lenca tribe governed in the east. Both civilizations imitated their Mayan brethren by fostering an agrarian society in the name of their gods. The Pipil and Lenca cultivated their land with crops like cocoa, cotton, indigo, and most importantly, corn. The Mayan influence could be seen most in pyramids and temples that have stood the test of time, the most famous being the Tazumal site in modern-day Santa Ana. We could also see Mayan influence in other cultural aspects in Salvadoran society, such as the emphasis of corn in the modern Salvadoran diet. Since the times of the Spanish invasion, subsequent disease outbreaks, and ethnic mixing between the Spanish and native peoples, the population of native tribes in the country has dwindled, but there are still Pipil and Lenca communities in the country. Saint Oscar Romero. Saint Oscar Arnulfo Romero was a Catholic priest who served as the bishop of the Archdiocese of San Salvador from 1977 to 1980. As Salvadoran society became increasingly violent and volatile in the lead-up to the Civil War in the 1970s, Romero became outspoken in his opposition to the military regime's persecution of Catholics and the poor. He also delivered very powerful radio sermons, which made him a household name in the Catholic country.
Some people, looking just at the right wing, think that social injustice is responsible for all the violence, and there are those who see provocations from the left as the only problem. But really there are three sources of violence: the right, the left, and the government. The people are confused, but we can't see the popular outbursts as just the demands of the left. The popular organizations are voicing the needs of the people, and the reaction of the organized left to repression is just to dig in and hold on. The demands of the people are just, but sometimes the people's anger goes too far and there are acts of violence which I cannot support.
Many resonated with his care for the poor in the face of persecution and social injustice. However, while delivering a mass in San Salvador on March 24, 1980, Oscar Romero was assassinated by a gunman at age 62. This assassination was decried by most of the world, and it was soon found out that it was ordered by Roberto D'Aubuisson, the leader of one of El Salvador's major death squads. Over 250,000 people from all over the world attended his funeral mass. However, soldiers planted bombs and started shooting at attendants who had to take refuge in the cathedral, which led to the deaths of more than 30 people. He was buried in the Metropolitan Cathedral in San Salvador. Oscar Romero was proclaimed a servant of God by Pope John Paul II, declared a martyr by Pope Francis, and finally declared a canonized saint in October 2018. Saint Oscar Romero is still very much a sentimentalized figure and patron saint in modern El Salvador, as his name is plastered on national highways, the major airport, and is seen everywhere from statues to murals. Ring of Fire. El Salvador is in a tectonic region that has been dubbed the Ring of Fire in the Pacific Ocean by seismologists. It is situated in the junction between the Cocos, Caribbean, and North American plates. Because of this, El Salvador frequently experiences tectonic activity. The country has over 170 volcanoes, including the famous Santa Ana, Izalco, San Salvador, San Vicente, and Ilopango volcanoes. El Salvador also frequently experiences earthquakes, including the most destructive earthquakes that took place in both 1986 and 2001, which led to the combined deaths of more than 2,000 people. On the upside, El Salvador uses this tectonic position to generate clean and cheap energy for the country through geothermal power. If you do visit El Salvador, I do recommend hiking up any of the volcanoes, as they provide a great view of the cities and natural landscapes. Fernand Flu. Luis Fernando Flores Alvarado, better known as Fernand Flu, is a popular YouTuber and Twitch streamer from El Salvador who specializes in comedic gaming videos. He has more than 47 million subscribers, and his videos have been viewed more than 10 billion times. Fernand Flu grew up in San Salvador, where he created his channel at the age of 18. His content consists of fast-paced edited gaming videos using games like Happy Wheels, Call of Duty, and Grand Theft Auto, among others. He's currently the 63rd most subscribed channel on all of YouTube, and is the 5th most subscribed Spanish-speaking channel. He's even been giving a shout out by Bukele on Twitter. Also, I'd like to note that he's the guy in the My Wife's Funeral meme, which I thought was pretty funny. Chicken buses. Chicken buses, or camionetas, are old school buses from the United States that are then transported to Central America. They are painted and repaired to serve as public transportation for the locals. Because of their age, these buses are loud, bumpy, and without air conditioning, and it's often crowded with people. Some bus owners just go above and beyond, painting them very bizarre colors or installing lights or speakers, which look pretty fun at night. Whether you're walking through the streets of San Salvador or San Miguel or through the countryside, these buses are a common sight. El Tunco. El Tunco Beach is a popular surfing village located in La Libertad, 35 kilometers or 21 miles from the capital city of San Salvador. El Tunco is popular with international tourists and surfers who come for the waves, picturesque nature, and nightlife. The highlight of the place is definitely the giant rock formation on the beach, and it is truly very stunning. I've personally been there, and it's a great tourist spot to spend a day in. Be careful with the rocks though, they're quite a nuisance. Diana. Diana is El Salvador's largest snack brand, selling everything from bagged chips and cookies to sweet treats and everything in between. The brand was founded in 1951 by Max Solano and Pablo Tesac in San Salvador, where they initially produced sandwiches and confectionaries. By 1978, the company expanded through exporting their products to Central America and the United States. The company is one of the largest food producers in all of El Salvador, with their products being found from large supermarkets to small snack stands in the countryside. It also boasts one of the biggest distribution fleets, shipping over 65,000 tons of food to 50 million consumers. Whether you're browsing through a supermarket or driving past billboards in the countryside, the brand is inescapable. Mr. Donut.
Bienvenido, Mr. Donut. ¿Qué desea ordenar?
Dime un café con una dona de chocolate.
¿Algo más?
Unos huevos, frijoles, un croissant sándwich y una horchata.
Ya no te preocupes por encontrar qué comer. Ahora estamos abiertos a la hora que te dé hambre. Mr. Donut 24 horas, porque el hambre no duerme. Mr. Donut, la gran variedad.
Mr. Donut is an international donut chain founded in the 1950s by American businessman Harry Winokur. It started after a partnership fell through between Winokur and his brother-in-law Bill Rosenberg, with the latter founding Dunkin' Donuts at the same time. At its peak in the 1980s, Mr. Donut had 550 stores in the US and Canada. They soon quickly expanded internationally to Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines, and El Salvador. However, the chain in the United States was bought out by Dunkin' Donuts in the 1990s, making it extinct in Canada and the United States. But Mr. Donut lives on in Japan and El Salvador. The latter serves a blend of American-style donuts, coffee, and Salvadoran cuisine. While there are some locations in smaller cities like Santa Ana and San Miguel, most locations are centered around San Salvador. State of exception. The war against the gangs, commonly referred to as the State of Exception, is a currently ongoing crackdown against the gangs that has been put in place since March 2022. It started in March of that year, when gangs gunned down more than 80 innocent civilians in a single weekend, marking it as El Salvador's bloodiest weekend since the end of the Civil War in 1992. In response, President Nayib Bukele and the national legislature declared a 30-day state of emergency, suspending some civil liberties guaranteed in the Constitution and giving police more powers to make arrests. As of April 2024, around 78,000 people have been arrested, or 75% of the Salvadoran gang population. As of May 2024, the crackdown is currently ongoing as the legislature continues to renew the act every single month. The crackdown has been incredibly popular, with most Salvadorans approving of the government's actions during the state of exception. The actions, however, have been criticized by international governments like the United States and the European Union, as well as NGOs for its quote-unquote eroding of civil liberties and the rule of law. President Nayib Bukele has decried these criticisms as protecting gang members over the Salvadoran population.
We started killing people and we became the murder capital of the world. Nobody could solve it. We took the recipes from the OAS, we took the recipes from the UN, we took the recipes from the European Union, we took the recipes from the United States. None of the recipes worked. More bloodshed, more people were dying. So what do? Okay, we do something and we save people. And now we're the safest country in the Western Hemisphere. But suddenly something's bad. Oh, but you shouldn't do that. You should do what I think you should do. Why? Not only we have the right to do what we think is right, and what the Salvadoran people are gonna decide whether or not they want this day in free elections, but also we've proven it works. And you haven't proven that your system works in our country. Might work in yours, I don't know, but it doesn't work in ours.
It has had quite a considerable effect in the region, as a similar crackdown has been taking place in nearby Honduras. This is currently a growing hot political topic among the American political conversation, so do let me know if you would like to see me make a video about the current crackdown.
El Salvador's president, Nayib Bukele, has converted El Salvador from the murder capital of the world into a reliable and stable partner for peace and security for the United States of America. The El Salvador Caucus will exist to nurture and advance the U.S.-El Salvador relationship, to encourage strong borders, strong culture, and the strong reforms that President Bukele has put into effect.
Arena. The Nationalist Republican Alliance, or Arena, is a Salvadoran right-wing political party founded in 1981 by Roberto D'Aubuisson, a prominent politician and death squad leader during the Civil War. Arena controlled the presidency from 1989 to 2009 under the administrations of Alfredo Cristiani, Armando Calderón Sol, Francisco Flores, and Antonio Saca. Arena has grown to become incredibly unpopular among Salvadoran voters for allegations of corruption and money laundering. In the most recent legislative election in February 2024, Arena controls 2 out of 60 seats in the national legislature. FMLN. The Feribundo Martí National Liberation Front, or FMLN, is a Salvadoran leftist political party founded in 1980 amid the Civil War. The party was named after Feribundo Martí, a Marxist revolutionary peasant who led a revolt in the 1930s, which will be mentioned later in the iceberg. The FMLN was a coalition of 5 different leftist groups which joined forces to combat the ruling military junta during the Civil War. The FMLN was notably funded by the Soviet Union and Cuba, as the conflict quickly became a Cold War-era proxy war. As part of the Chapultepec Peace Accords in 1992, the FMLN was forced to demobilize and become a legal political party. For most of the 90s and 2000s, the FMLN served as an opposition party to Arena, before gaining power in 2009 and 2014, under the leadership of Mauricio Funes and Salvador Sanchez Seren, respectively. The FMLN has grown to become incredibly unpopular like Arena due to its corruption and nepotism among party leaders. In the most recent legislative election in February 2024, the FMLN has been booted from the national legislature, losing all 4 seats they held previously. Nuevas Ideas. Nuevas Ideas, or New Ideas, is the current ruling party of El Salvador under the leadership of President Nayib Bukele. It was founded in 2017, shortly after Bukele split with the FMLN. It has been described as a center-right populist party which rejects the label of right-wing and left-wing. At the beginning of Bukele's administration in 2019, Nuevas Ideas was non-existent in the national legislature. That changed in 2021, when Nuevas Ideas gained a landslide victory in the legislative elections, gaining over 56 out of 84 seats. In the most recent presidential election, Nayib Bukele won the presidency with 84% of the vote, with Nuevas Ideas winning 54 out of 60 seats in the national legislature, giving them an outright supermajority. Nuevas Ideas has since become the most dominant party in Salvadoran politics, basically serving as a vehicle for President Nayib Bukele. José Arturo Castellanos. José Arturo Castellanos was a Salvadoran army colonel and diplomat who worked at El Salvador's consul general in Geneva, Switzerland during World War II. During his tenure in Switzerland, he was approached by Jewish-Romanian businessman Gheorghe Mandel with a plea to save Jews amid the Holocaust. He agreed, and he worked with Mandel to provide at least 13,000 certificates of Salvadoran citizenship to Central European Jews, which allowed them to receive protection from the International Red Cross and Swiss authorities. Following the end of World War II and his retirement, Castellanos remained discreet about his role into the 1970s, when he gave a handful of interviews to Salvadoran media. Castellanos passed away in 1977 at the age of 83. He is credited with helping save 40,000 Jews from Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Poland, and Romania during the Holocaust. Mágico González. Jorge Alberto González, better known as El Mago or Mágico González, is a Salvadoran former footballer who made a name for himself as an excellent forward for the Salvador national team. Because of his excellent dribbling and quick tactics, he helped qualify El Salvador for the 1982 FIFA World Cup in Spain.
Allá va el Mago González, el Mago en el sprint, el Mago ahí en la llegada, el Mago entra al área y... repetición, vean a dónde arranca el Mago González, cuellarito el sprint, donde estaba Munguía, el medio de contención, el Mago dispara, la pelota queda ahí, y a pesar...
Although El Salvador lost dramatically to Hungary 10-1 during the World Cup, he was enamored by the Spanish public. He then made a deal with the Spanish Cadiz club, where he continued to be a fan favorite. He was notorious for his unsavory lifestyle, preferring to go to the club with prostitutes instead of training with his own team. When Cadiz played against Diego Maradona in Barcelona, Maradona noted that Mágico was superior to both Pelé and him.
There's Maradona crisscrossing with González. Maradona for close. Back to Diego Maradona. A lead for Mágico González in the area. Shot and a goal for Magic Man González. And it's 2-1 Barcelona.
Well, you could see that coming. We kept talking about González all the time, but he made a great point apparently that there's somebody behind him and does not look over his shoulder. So worried is he about Maradona that he lets Julio.
Teams like PSG and Sampdoria were interested in signing him, but Mago decided to stay with Cadiz. After a successful run with Cadiz with 72 goals in 203 games, Mago returned to El Salvador in 1991. He spent the next 9 years playing with Santa Ana in El Salvador before retiring in 2000. In his heyday, Mago was an extraordinary player who unfortunately stunted his growth because of his lack of discipline. Nonetheless, he continues to be an icon in Salvadoran modern history and in the world of club football. Maribel Arrieta.
Here's Maribel Arrieta, voted Miss Friendship by the contestants.
My name is Maribel Arrieta, Miss El Salvador. I'm very happy to be here with you in the United States, but I'm also happy I'm going home. San Salvador, allá voy.
Maribel Arrieta was a Salvadoran beauty queen who represented her country at the 1955 Miss Universe contest in Long Beach, California. She became famous for her incredible resemblance to American actress Marilyn Monroe. Although she lost to Hillevi Rambin, Miss Sweden, Arrieta was the runner-up and was crowned Miss Congeniality 1955. She would later star in a Mexican film titled We'll Meet in Heaven.
Estás maravillosa.
Gracias.
¿Y Eugenio?
En el guardarropa dejando los abrigos. No pude resistir el verte antes.
Dime, ¿eres feliz con...?
Soy una buena esposa.
She would later serve as a judge for the Miss Universe contest in 1975 when it was hosted in El Salvador. Sadly, Arrieta would pass away from cancer in 1989 at the age of 55. Interestingly enough, she is the second cousin of Roberto D'Aubuisson, the aforementioned founder of Arena and notorious death squad leader during the Salvadoran Civil War. CIFCO. CIFCO, or the International Center of Fairs and Conventions, was a convention center in the middle of San Salvador, which hosted a variety of events such as concerts, presidential inaugurations, international summits, and most famously, the yearly fair known as Consuma, home of the notorious Tagada ride. It opened in 1975 and had a capacity of over 200,000 people. When the COVID-19 pandemic hit El Salvador in 2020, President Nayib Bukele converted the convention center into a temporary hospital. Later that June, Bukele announced that the hospital would remain permanent and would be expanded, transforming CIFCO into Hospital El Salvador, the largest hospital in all of Latin America. It currently has around 400 available beds in the state-of-the-art facility, and all of the events that took place, including Consuma, now take place in other venues throughout the country. Oloquilta. Oloquilta is a small village in the department of La Paz, El Salvador, situated between the major international airport and the San Salvador metropolitan region. It is most well known for their pupusas and has been considered the pupusa capital of El Salvador. Here you can find many rows of pupuserias employed by women who entice you to do business with them. They've even been included in the Guinness Book of World Records in November 2015 for creating the largest pupusa in the world, at 4.5 meters or 14 feet and 9 inches. Its location is absolutely perfect because it's halfway between the international airport and the San Salvador city center, so it's super easy for international tourists to stop by and grab a bite to eat while they travel to San Salvador. And you should join them. I give them a Snoop seal of approval. Teleférico San Jacinto. Teleférico San Jacinto, also known as the Kingdom of the Bird and Cloud, was an amusement park located outside of San Salvador. It became well known for its gondola system, which took attendees up and down the San Jacinto mountain to enter and exit the park. The park featured roller coasters and other rides for young children and families. The theme park was a staple for Salvadoran kids growing up from the late 70s to late 90s. However, the park shut down and became abandoned in 2001 following financial difficulties as well as the effects from the destructive earthquake. For years, the people of El Salvador witnessed as this beloved park became abandoned and hidden by the elements. In 2019, the government of Soyapango announced that the site of the former park would be redeveloped into a $3 million state-of-the-art tourist park made up of a skate park, food plaza, outdoor gym, and playground. However, it's been a few years since this project was announced and progress has been incredibly slow. Let's hope that this plan will continue because it would do it justice for the people who had memories of this iconic park. If you would like to learn more about Teleférico San Jacinto, I actually uploaded a great piece of history 4 years ago, filmed by my own family, who documented their visit to the theme park in the late 90s. They explored the whole park, and it gives you an idea of what the park looked like in its heyday. Joya de Siren. Joya de Siren is an archaeological site located in the department of La Libertad in western El Salvador. This site contains the remains of a pre-Columbian farming village which was buried by volcanic ash following the eruption of the Ilopango volcano around 500 AD. The site was undiscovered until 1976. Luckily for archaeologists, many of the structures and artifacts were in great condition. Everything from storehouses to garden tools to pots and sleeping mats were found very intact, giving us an excellent peek into what the pre-Columbian inhabitants' daily life was like before the eruption of the Ilopango volcano. I have personally visited the site, and it is incredible to see how well preserved these artifacts are. Football War. The Football War, also known as the 100 Hours War, was a short but deadly conflict between El Salvador and Honduras, which took place in July 1969. Tensions between the two nations were high, as Honduras instituted a hostile policy against Salvadoran migrants through land reform and outright violence. Honduras and El Salvador were scheduled to play against each other to qualify for the 1970 Mexico World Cup, which quickly became heated. As El Salvador defeated Honduras, and the situation for Salvadorans in Honduras became untenable, El Salvador severed diplomatic relations between them and Honduras and declared a state of war.
Tengo la especial satisfacción de dirigirme a ustedes, como es mi costumbre hacerlo, con entera franqueza y sinceridad. El pueblo está convencido de que tiene la razón, no puede fracasar en su lucha. La propaganda de Honduras está tratando de debilitar la moral del heroico pueblo de El Salvador.
The war lasted 4 days as the Organization of American States intervened to end the conflict. A ceasefire was declared, and a peace treaty was signed in 1980. However, the war was incredibly destabilizing for El Salvador, as some historians argue that it was instrumental in the explosion of the Civil War a decade later. I would love to make a full historical documentary on this conflict because most retellings on YouTube have not done it justice at all.
哎呀，这事真难搞啊！
El Salvador ripped off Rossini? The national anthem of El Salvador was written by General Juan José Cañas in 1856, with Italian composer Juan Aberle providing the music in 1879. It was adopted by the state in September 1879 to commemorate the 50th anniversary of Salvadoran independence from Spanish rule in 1821. However, critics have argued that the anthem blatantly rips off Italian composer Gioacchino Rossini and his 1829 finale to the William Tell Overture, most heard in cartoons. I'll let you listen to both tracks so you can get an idea. While I do hear a similarity in the introductions, in my professional opinion, I think it would be dishonest to call it a carbon copy. I'd say perhaps there was an inspiration, but the rest of the anthem sounds completely different from Rossini's iconic composition. Federal Republic of Central America. The Federal Republic of Central America, also known as the United Provinces of Central America, was a short-lived nation comprised of the modern states of Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Costa Rica. This nation was founded by liberal politician Francisco Morazan in 1823 following his successful war against Spanish and later Mexican rule. However, the republic was plagued by civil war between liberals and conservatives, which resulted in the defeat of Morazan and the subsequent independence of the modern 5 states that make up the modern region of Central America. Although the project failed dramatically, the Republic has created a sort of revanchist legacy for nationalists in Central America, and efforts have been made to reunify in the century since, but to no avail. In recent years, President Nayib Bukele has called for a strengthening of ties between Central America, which would eventually result in a unified Central American state once again.
Pero si no lo hacemos nosotros, yo les apuesto que la generación Z lo va a hacer. Porque para ellos las divisiones que crearon hace 200 años ya no significan nada. Los pleitos que hicieron las oligarquías de Guatemala con la de El Salvador, con la de Honduras, y que se pelearon y se dividieron, ya no significan nada. Así, no deberían ni siquiera significar nada para nosotros. Pero ya no se diga para los millennials, pero para la generación Z, créanme que las divisiones que hicieron que Centroamérica no fuera un solo país, en un montón de protoestados, casi todos fallidos, ya no significan nada.
José Matías Delgado. José Matías Delgado was a Catholic priest and doctor who became involved in the Salvadoran independence movement against Spanish rule in the early 19th century. Delgado was one of 28 signatories of the Act of Independence of Central America in September 1821. He celebrated his country's independence in the center of San Salvador as church bells rang out with thousands in attendance. He would then serve as the head of the political chief of San Salvador as well as the president of the Constituent Assembly of the United Provinces of Central America from 1821 to 1823. In the modern Salvadoran imagination, Delgado is considered the father of the Salvadoran nation, and statues of him can be seen throughout the country. El Salvador supported the Axis powers. From 1931 to 1944, El Salvador was under the political domination of authoritarian dictator Maximiliano Hernández Martínez, who took power in a military coup against the man who promoted Martínez to the position of vice president, Arturo Araujo. Under the rule of Hernández Martínez and his National Pro Patria party, El Salvador started becoming close to the fascist powers in Europe and Asia, namely Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, Francoist Spain, and the Japanese Empire. His government would recognize the Axis puppet states of Manchukuo and Slovakia. Hernández Martínez would also appoint Wehrmacht General Eberhard Bonstedt to head the Salvadoran Military Academy. Before World War II ignited, El Salvador traded its valuable commodities like coffee to Germany more than they traded with the United States. However, when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in December 1941, Hernández Martínez's regime changed course, declaring war on the Axis powers and joining forces with the Allied powers, allowing El Salvador to become one of the founding members of the United Nations. Hernández Martínez himself would be overthrown in a military coup in 1944 and would be assassinated while in exile in Honduras in 1966. El Salvador-Tibet UN protests. In October 1950, following the victory of Mao Zedong's Communist Party during the Chinese Civil War, PLA forces invaded the state of Tibet. The Tibetan state had been independent since the fall of the Qing dynasty in 1912 and was now headed by the 14th Dalai Lama. In November 1950, the Tibetan government issued a telegram to the United Nations General Assembly imploring them to stop the communist invasion of Tibet. El Salvador was the only delegation to sponsor Tibet's claims. Meanwhile, the UN did nothing as they were more focused on the Korean War. El Salvador's relations with Tibet would run cold when they began diplomatic relations with the People's Republic of China in 2018. Nahapa Fireballs. In the town of Nahapa, 30 kilometers or 18 miles north of San Salvador, residents celebrate a volcanic eruption in a way that seems bizarre, with fireballs. Every August 31st, residents commemorate a 1658 volcanic eruption. According to a legend, when residents witnessed this volcano erupt, locals saw great balls of fire, believing that Saint Jerome was defending them against Satan. During the night of the festival, Nahapa becomes a free-for-all, with residents throwing kerosene-drenched rags which are then lit on fire, while crowds cheer them on. It might sound incredibly dangerous, but medical personnel remain on standby and there have been few injuries from the festival in recent years. The Angel List. The Angel List, also known as the List of Corrupt and Anti-Democratic Actors, is a sanction list consisting of individuals that the United States government believed to be quote-unquote corrupt and undemocratic actors in Central America. This list was created in late 2020 by Congressman Eliot Engel, then Democratic representative from New York, for whom the list is named after. The US State Department under Biden has greatly expanded the list to include various government ministers of Presidents Nayib Bukele, Xiomara Castro, and Alejandro Giammattei of El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala respectively. In the case of El Salvador, Labor Minister Rolando Castro, Cabinet Chief Carolina Recinos, and former Justice and Security Minister Rogelio Rivas, as well as Bukele's press secretary Ernesto Sanabria, have been also sanctioned. President Bukele has decried the list as an attempt to marginalize and foment a coup against him, and the list has since become a major source of Central America's rift with the Biden administration in the United States. Mysterious Villa. In the summer of 2021, video emerged of a mysterious abandoned villa emerged on Salvadoran social media on the beach of La Puntilla, 75 kilometers or 46 miles south of San Salvador, and went viral when Salvadoran YouTuber Cholo Panza shared it on his social media sites. Locals claim that this mysterious Roman-style villa was a 25-year-old hotel called the Hotel Puerto Aventura. Others believe that the hotel was abandoned 25 years ago as a result of Hurricane Mitch. However, as a result of rising sea levels, the building became unstable and was abandoned with the fear of it collapsing. There has been an urban legend that a tall, mysterious man has been haunting the structure. Regardless of his origins, it continues to be an eerie sight for the locals and tourists alike. Neon War. Hugo Nelson Serrano, known on YouTube as Neon War, was a Salvadoran animator who made animated comedy videos. Hugo started the Neon War YouTube channel in June of 2011. The video starred Cheo and Loy, two young kids who got involved in hijinks while going through daily life in El Salvador.
Maje, la cagamos, hubiéramos traído la China.
Está bueno por culeros. Pichos, me ayudan a hacer un castillo de arena.
Ahorita lo hacemos. Maje, hacerlo con la cubeta es más fácil.
No, hombre, así con la mano no lo voy a hacer, así queda más vergón.
Puta, es que esté bien cerote vos.
No te preocupes, Wendy, el mío va a quedar más chivo, no como el del pupu seco.
Vergón, maje, ¿por qué me andas diciendo así?
Ah, tapachito al río, te picaste, pues. Yo de que el pedazo de pupu seco que está ahí estaba hablando.
Te voy a dar en el hocico, maje.
Amaños que haces vos, maje. Más que está haciendo un gran calor, hubiéramos pedido una soda, maje, porque... ¿Qué pasó?
Te está temblando.
¿Ah?
Cerote, está temblando.
No,
culero,
hijo de puta, vámonos a la mierda.
Está temblando, vámonos a la
corre.
mierda. Bichos, el liceo, el gordo, está temblando, sáquense de la casa.
Neon War became a beloved member of the Salvadoran online community and amassed 250,000 subscribers. However, Hugo revealed in 2020 that he was diagnosed with lymphatic cancer, with his parents making a GoFundMe that raised around $20,000.
Me gustaría decir el presidente, pero sé que pasa muy ocupado, ¿verdad? Por toda esta cuestión de las elecciones. Para solicitar una visa humanitaria, una visa donde solo me dejen viajar a Estados Unidos para terminar un ensayo clínico. ¿De qué se trata ese ensayo clínico? Es para experimentar, bien, es un ensayo para experimentar nuevos fármacos y pues tal vez tener un mejor resultado para mi enfermedad, para mi tratamiento del cáncer, ya que llegamos a las últimas y lastimosamente no hay resultado.
President Nayib Bukele also intervened to send Hugo to the United States to receive chemotherapy. Content creation had been suspended so Hugo would receive treatment as the Salvadoran community rallied behind him in support. Sadly, Hugo passed away from cancer on the 5th of February 2021 at the age of 31. His family would announce on Facebook saying, "We regret to inform you that our big brother Neon War has lost the battle against cancer and has departed into the arms of the Lord. We want to thank you for all the love and support you gave him from his beginnings with his videos and then with his process during cancer. Without you, he would not have been able to achieve everything he achieved, and we know that he was incredibly grateful to all of you. Unfortunately, he cannot give you a few words, but as a family, we know that he was happy and satisfied with your support. As a family, we also appreciate each of your prayers and therefore love for our beloved Neon War." 14 families. The 14 families referred to an elite group of oligarchs who controlled most of the wealth and land in El Salvador during the 19th and 20th century. According to oligarch Jorge Sol Castellanos, it's an oligarchy because these families own and run almost everything that makes money in El Salvador. Coffee gave birth to the oligarchy in the late 19th century and economic growth has revolved around them since then. These families controlled more than 70% of El Salvador's private banks, sugar mills, coffee production and exports, television, and newspapers. Modern Salvadoran oligarchs have switched from being landowning exporters to investors, and the country continues to be dominated by 8 powerful business interest groups. All of this manipulation came at the expense of much of the Salvadoran population, who cannot share in the wealth made from the export of these economic goods. Palestinian influence. Interestingly enough, there is a large and influential Salvadoran community made up of ethnic Palestinian Arabs. Many of these Palestinians immigrated to El Salvador when the region was controlled by the Ottoman Empire before the outbreak of World War I. These Palestinians, who were primarily Christian, became marginalized and excluded from Salvadoran political and economic life. Nonetheless, these Arab Salvadorans have become quite successful. As of now, there are close to 100,000 Salvadorans of Palestinian descent, and they have a strong influence in the political and economic sphere in El Salvador. Notable people include President Nayib Bukele and his father Armando Bukele Catan, former President Antonio Saca, rebel leader and politician Shafi Kandol and his son Shafi Kandol Jr., politician Hato Hasbun, Minister of Health Francisco Alabay, and businessman Oscar Antonio Safi, just to name a few. Death of Matthew Knight. In May 2004, Matthew Knight, the heir and eldest son of Nike co-founder Phil Knight, traveled to El Salvador with 2 friends to go scuba diving. They came to Lake Ilopango, a deepwater lake 14 kilometers or 8 miles east of San Salvador. According to Phil Knight, for some reason he decided to see how deep he would go. He decided to take a risk that even his father would never take. Something went wrong. At 150 feet, my son lost consciousness. When his friend noticed, they took him out of the water to try to resuscitate him. Alas, it was too late. Matthew Knight passed away at the age of 34 from asphyxiation related to submersion. According to the Nike billionaire, when he and his wife were given the news, Penny fell to the floor. Travis helped her up. He put his arm around his mother and I staggered away to the end of the hallway, tears streaming. I recall 7 strange unbidden words running through my head over and over, like a fragment of some poem. So, this is the way it ends. Knight would honor his son in 2011 by naming the home stadium of the Oregon Ducks basketball team after him. Hernandez Martinez and occultism. President Hernandez Martinez, dictator of El Salvador during World War II, was born and raised Catholic by his family, but became estranged from them when he abandoned his Catholic faith and approached theosophy, an esoteric occultist Western philosophy. Martinez abstained from drinking, smoking, and eating meat since he was an avid vegan. He was also greatly influenced by a German friend named Hugo Reiner, a fellow theosophist and crystal gazer. He also believed in reincarnation and is quoted as saying, "It is a greater crime to kill an ant than a man, for when a man dies, he becomes reincarnated, while an ant dies forever. When it came to peasants that he butchered in the upcoming 1932 massacre on this iceberg, he genuinely believed that if some of the peasants he killed were innocent of being subversives, nonetheless he had done them a favor of sending them to their next, possibly better life. In his house, Martinez would hold seances, or attempts at communicating with the dead. Legend also says that when a smallpox outbreak broke out in San Salvador, Martinez had colored lights hung throughout the city, out of a belief that the spirits would curb the outbreak. I'm sure you're just as baffled as I am. Gulf of Fonseca dispute. The Gulf of Fonseca is a bay in the Pacific Ocean that borders El Salvador, Honduras, and Nicaragua. It covers approximately 3,200 square kilometers and is rich in biodiversity. For several decades now, the region has been in dispute between the three nations. The Gulf contains natural resources and has a vital geostrategic position in the Pacific Ocean, which is why the three states were eager to gain control over the Gulf. It would become more contentious when foreign powers proposed building infrastructure projects in the area, such as a transoceanic railway and port. However, in 1992, the dispute nominally subsided when the International Court of Justice in The Hague issued a ruling, giving Honduras 2/3 of the territory. In spite of that, the dispute continues. There is an island in the Gulf named Isla Conejo, or Rabbit Island, which is controlled by the Honduran government, but El Salvador continues to claim sovereignty over the island, declaring that Honduras illegally occupied the island in 1982.
Esto siempre ha sido, siempre fue y siempre será territorio y parte integral de la República de Honduras, de nosotros los hondureños.
La resolución de 1992 que dirimió la controversia terrestre y marítima entre El Salvador y Honduras revela que el territorio que tropas hondureñas ocupan de facto, refiriéndose a la isla Conejo, es territorio salvadoreño. Situación que Honduras nunca aceptó. Esta resolución no contiene nada que ponga en duda la posesión de la isla. Por lo tanto, no aceptamos la posición de la canciller hondureña que dice que remitiéndose a ese fallo, ahí en ese fallo claramente quedaron delimitados los territorios en poder soberano de Honduras y en poder soberano de El Salvador, y que de acuerdo a ese fallo la isla Conejo pertenece a Honduras. No es cierto, porque el fallo nunca se refirió a la isla Conejo, porque esa isla en ese momento no estaba en disputa ni nunca ha estado en disputa.
Honduras maintains a military force on the island, and there have been incidents of Salvadoran fishermen being detained by Honduran authorities. El Salvador continues to claim the island as arbitration is being awaited by the ICC. Justo Armas. This is Maximilian I, the Habsburg Emperor of the Second Mexican Empire from 1864 to his execution in 1867 at the hands of Mexican revolutionary forces. Maximilian was charged with conspiring to overthrow the Mexican government and with carrying out the Black Decree. He was executed on the morning of June 19, 1867 by a firing squad. His body was embalmed and displayed for the Mexican public to witness. Historians have confirmed that the body of Maximilian is in fact real. However, that has not stopped conspiracy theorists from claiming that Emperor Maximilian changed his name to Justo Armas. Not only that, but theorists also claim that Maximilian entered a secret agreement with revolutionary Benito Juarez to flee into exile in El Salvador. This mysterious Justo Armas was a Salvadoran merchant who was described as eccentric and cultured. His birth date remains a mystery, but Justo Armas died in May 1936 in San Salvador. Ultimately, not much is known about this man of possible Austrian origin, which is why this conspiracy connecting him to the former Mexican emperor persists. The Mystery of Multiplaza. Multiplaza is a chain of commercial shopping malls which is owned by the Salvadoran Roble Group Corporation, and they have 22 malls across Latin America. The one and only mall in El Salvador is located in Antiguo Cuscatlán, near San Salvador, and was opened in 2004. The mall in El Salvador contains over 250 establishments, from Nike and Adidas to Pizza Hut and Rolex, just to name a few. However, there are very eerie urban legends regarding the construction and current state of Multiplaza. The legend goes that there were 2 construction workers who went missing in the garage basement. Mall goers have heard very bizarre noises such as loud screams from spirits, as well as the sounds of a galloping ghost black horse. This is most likely a crock of shit from people on social media trying to be funny, but hey, it's fun to theorize. Leonel Gonzalez. Commander Leonel Gonzalez is the wartime pseudonym of Salvador Sanchez Cerén, who would go on to become president of El Salvador in the 2014 election. Prior to the explosion of the Civil War in 1979, Sanchez Cerén was a leftist militant in the Farabundo Martí Popular Liberation Forces, or FPL, where he would become involved in violent insurrection against the Salvadoran military regime. During the Civil War, Sanchez Cerén became a commander in the FMLN and led various campaigns against the Salvadoran military junta until the end of the war in January 1992.
Es una voluntad de guerra la que hay en el alto mando. Es una voluntad de darle una cobertura política a la guerra en El Salvador. Lo que está en discusión en El Salvador es un problema complejo que tiene a su base raíces profundas. La crisis en El Salvador tiene a su base una injusticia social y económica. La crisis en El Salvador tiene a su base la injerencia directa, cada vez más descarada, de los Estados Unidos en el problema salvadoreño.
Under his leadership, the FMLN was able to demobilize and become a legal political party in the 90s. He quickly became involved in electoral politics, serving as a deputy in the legislature before becoming vice president and then president. Cerén is now in exile in Nicaragua because of serious allegations of money laundering and corruption during his administration. Now, when people discuss Commander Leonel Gonzalez, they do it in a mocking and negative fashion. El Salvador had its own Chernobyl? When we think of nuclear accidents, what immediately comes to mind? Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, and Fukushima. Either we saw these events on the news, or we know about them from HBO retellings. However, did you know that El Salvador had its own radiological accident? It is the morning of February 5th, 1989, at an industrial irradiation facility in Soyapango, San Salvador, 2 a.m. local time. This facility was built and commissioned in the 1970s, and the facility handled prepackaged medical products which are sterilized by irradiation. On this early February morning, this source rack became stuck in the irradiation position. The operator bypassed the irradiator's safety systems and entered the radiation room to free the source rack manually. The 3 workers were thus exposed to high doses of radiation and quickly developed acute radiation syndrome. They were quickly transported to Mexico for specialized treatment. The worker who was exposed to radiation the longest passed away 6 months after the accident as a result of residual lung damage from the irradiation. The other 2 workers were seriously injured to the point that their limbs needed to be amputated. In retrospect, radiologists blame the accident on decades of poor training of the staff, neglect on the part of inspection teams, and the broken supply chain because of the ongoing civil war. This is a synopsis, and I am by no means a radiologist, so I encourage you to watch this more fleshed out video by YouTube creator Plainly Difficult, which I will link down below. The Cuscatlan Bridge. The Cuscatlan Bridge was a suspension bridge which spanned across the Lempa River in eastern El Salvador. It was 820 feet or 250 meters long, supported by 2 series of 16 2-inch diameter steel cables. It was constructed in 1942 and inaugurated by Salvadoran dictator Hernandez Martinez. At the time, it was considered an engineering marvel, because before the bridge's construction, the East was isolated from the rest of the country. It was also a vital piece of infrastructure for the Pan-American Highway connecting San Salvador to the rest of the highway in Central America. The bridge stood for over 40 years before the Civil War ignited in the early 80s. The FMLN, in its efforts to cripple the Salvadoran military regime, made it a mission to destroy or sabotage infrastructure, including power lines, dams, factories, roads, or bridges. This included the Cuscatlan Bridge, which allowed commercial access and reinforcements into the east. On the 1st of January 1984, FMLN militants bombed the bridge, which caused it to collapse. A temporary bridge was built after the attack. However, in 1998, a 400-meter-long bridge was constructed in its place, with financial assistance from the Japanese government, where it stands to this day. Although the original bridge is long gone, the support beams can still be seen. Aviateca Flight 901.
Llamaremos sobre la estación y autorizado a proceder para ILS para la 07, Aviateca 901. Afirmativo. Llame abandonando 8000. El Aviateca 901 está alcanzando 5000 pies. Enterado. Notifique cruzando el radial 155 al sur de la estación. Confirme radial que cruza Aviateca 901. Aviateca 901, El Salvador. Aviateca 901, El Salvador.
On the 9th of August, 1995, Aviateca Flight 901, a Boeing 737 en route to San Salvador from Guatemala City, crashed into the San Vicente volcano as it was approaching the airport. The flight was made up of 58 passengers with 7 crew on board. The flight was piloted by 39-year-old Captain Axel Herrera and 36-year-old Victor Salguero. According to a following investigation, Flight 901 contacted air traffic controllers in San Salvador, with controllers responding that there was a heavy thunderstorm. They ultimately instructed the crew to fly over the storm and start their approach toward the runway. However, the crew was confused and entered through the storm that they tried to avoid, but crashed into the volcano when the ground proximity warning system was sounded too late. The plane was destroyed on impact, with all 65 passengers dying on impact. Investigators ultimately believe that the accident was caused by the flight crew's lack of situational awareness and an effective crew resource management program at Aviateca. El Mozote. El Mozote was a massacre that took place in a village of the same name in December 1981 during the Salvadoran Civil War. The village was located in the Morazan department, near the border with Honduras. The anti-communist Atlacato battalion entered the village to eliminate those who were harboring the FMLN. Over the span of 3 days in December, these troops proceeded to interrogate, torture, execute, and even rape innocent men, women, children, and babies. After slaughtering the entire population, the village was set on fire. Historians estimate that nearly 1,000 people were massacred during these 3 days, and became one of the darkest and most shameful events in modern Salvadoran history. After the war ended in 1992, the Truth Commission for El Salvador implicated members of the battalion for the events in El Mozote, but these members were given amnesty in 1993 by the Salvadoran government. In 2011, the Salvadoran government formally apologized for the massacre, and the investigation into El Mozote has been ongoing after 40 years.
¿Cuántos sinvergüenzas llegaron al gobierno y estuvieron ahí 10 años y se les olvidó todito? La guerra fue una farsa. Mataron más de 75,000 personas entre los dos bandos, incluyendo los 1,000 aquí del Mozote, y fue una farsa.
Lolotique killings. On the 2nd of January 1991, during the Salvadoran Civil War, a U.S. military helicopter transporting 3 American soldiers from Honduras was shot down by the FMLN with a surface-to-air missile near the village of Lolotique, 120 kilometers or 75 miles from San Salvador. The pilot, Daniel F. Scott, passed away in the crash. Lieutenant Colonel David H. Pickett and Corporal Ernest G. Dawson survived but were later executed by FMLN leaders Severiano Fuentes and Fernan Fernandez. Although the two turned themselves in a year later, they were given amnesty because of the 1993 Amnesty Bill. Human Rights Watch referred to the incident in January 1991 as the most infamous FMLN war crime during the war. In 2016, however, the Salvadoran Supreme Court overturned the amnesty law, which paved the way for prosecutors to pursue arrest warrants for military and FMLN officials who were engaged in war crimes. Although Fuentes and Fernandez are still at large, the man accused of shooting down the military helicopter, Santos Guevara, was arrested in 2020. Zona Rosa. At 9 p.m. on June 19, 1985, the Revolutionary Party of Central American Workers, a pro-FMLN militant group, launched a guerrilla attack in the Zona Rosa restaurant district in San Salvador. The attack was carried out by gunmen who were dressed as Salvadoran military soldiers in front of a cafe. 13 people were brutally killed in the attacks, including 4 United States Marines as well as 2 American businessmen. The following month, the United States offered $100,000 for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the attackers. By September, the Salvadoran government arrested 4 men, including Comandante Hugo, an alias for Americo Mauro Araujo, a ranking Communist Party official. La Matanza. From January to February 1932, a revolt and subsequent massacre took place in the western states of El Salvador. Peasant rebels led by Frodomundo Martí and his ethnic Pipil forces launched a rebellion against the government of Hernández Martínez during his takeover of the government a year prior. Frodomundo Martí had previously fought in Nicaragua against the American occupation of the country. The coffee-centric economy of El Salvador was in chaos as the Great Depression created a fall in coffee prices, hitting the country like a train. Thousands of peasants took up poorly made machetes and shotguns to capture towns and inflict property damage against the government, killing 2,000 people in the process. However, after 3 days, Salvadoran military reinforcements ordered by Hernández Martínez arrived and committed large-scale killings against the rebels as well as ethnic Pipils. As many as 40,000 people, including civilians, died in the ensuing massacre. Many of the communist leaders were rounded up and executed by firing squads, including Frodomundo Martí. The massacre devastated the Salvadoran indigenous community, with some historians referring to the event as an ethnocide. The event is commemorated in the town of Izalco every January 22nd. The Salvadoran government formally apologized to the indigenous communities in 2010 for the quote-unquote brutal acts of persecution and extermination carried out by previous governments. American nuns murdered. On the afternoon of December 2nd, 1980, American Maryknoll Catholic missionaries, Dorothy Kazel and Jean Donovan, traveled to the international airport near San Salvador to pick up 2 other Catholic missionaries, Ida Ford and Mara Clark, who flew into El Salvador after attending a conference in Nicaragua. A Salvador National Guardsman spotted them and phoned his commanders. That night on the drive home, all 4 women were abducted, raped, and shot to death by the army, with their bodies being buried in a shallow grave. This attack produced public outrage in El Salvador and the United States, with it igniting a political debate over America's support of the Salvadoran junta in the early years of the Civil War. The 4 guardsmen responsible for the attack were convicted of murder in 1984 and sentenced to 30 years in prison. They would admit that the orders for their rape and murders came from above in the Salvadoran government. Furthermore, a 1993 United Nations Truth Commission report concluded that the murders were covered up by members of the Salvadoran government, namely the Director of the National Guard and the Minister of Defense. The story of the Maryknoll nuns' murders remains one of the most shameful episodes in modern Salvadoran history, with Pope Francis referring to the sisters as martyrs, who lived their life with great generosity. They are an example to all of us to become faithful missionary disciples. Kidnapping of President Duarte's daughter. In September 1985, amid the Civil War, the eldest daughter of then-President Jose Napoleon Duarte, Inés Guadalupe Duarte Duran, was kidnapped by 2 armed rebel gunmen. Inés, 35 at the time, had been the manager of the Libertad radio network of the ruling Christian Democratic Party. At the time, Inés had arrived at the Nueva San Salvador University with her bodyguards when the gunmen ambushed their vehicle, killing 1 bodyguard and wounding another. They then dragged Inés and a friend from the vehicle by their hair and kept them in custody. One anonymous kidnapper had threatened to abduct more of President Duarte's family members, leading the president to send them to the United States for their safety. After the kidnapping, a national manhunt was launched with all roads in and out of the capital city being closed. After a month, an agreement was signed between the Salvadoran government and FMLN, which freed Inés, her friend, and 33 other officials in exchange for 20 political prisoners and the safe passage for 100 wounded guerrillas out of the country. The president and his daughter emotionally reunited that October, with President Duarte expressing great joy for his daughter's release after a month of depression over her disappearance.
Mi papá, se acercaron ellos, me abrazaban, lloraban. Mi papá estaba haciendo un gran esfuerzo por no llorar. Y yo solo sentía los brazos de mi papá, pero apretados. Y en el video se ve que me aprieta así duro. ¿Por qué? Porque no me quería soltar. Él me volvía a abrazar, me daba besos, ¿verdad? Pero lo que les dije a los niños, él solo me abrazaba, Lucrecia también. Ellos estaban como impactados, ¿verdad? Habían sufrido mucho.
Andres Suster. On September 26, 1995, Andres Suster, the 15-year-old son of a prominent ally of former President Alfredo Cristiani, was kidnapped by leftist militants in Santa Tecla, near San Salvador. According to Suster, 4 men with fake beards and machine guns swarmed the school minibus that he was riding in, promptly blindfolding and kidnapping him. He was placed in captivity on a farm in La Libertad province in appalling and unsanitary conditions. The kidnapping captured national and international attention, with the Salvadoran state declaring a manhunt for Suster and the men responsible for his kidnapping. After 347 days in captivity on September 13, 1996, Suster was released, having lost 50 pounds and not showering or getting his hair cut once. One of Suster's kidnappers was caught by authorities and was sentenced to 63 years in prison. Andres Suster is still alive and has learned to forgive his kidnappers despite knowing that they deprived him of his liberty and security. Hasta el Tope Offensive. In November 1989, the major engagement of the Salvadoran Civil War took place between military regime and FMLN forces, known as La Ofensiva Hasta el Tope. This offensive took place 2 days after the collapse of the Berlin Wall, with FMLN commanders beginning to worry about the longevity of global communism. FMLN commanders set their sights on San Salvador, engaging in brutal street fighting against government forces. During the offensive, Salvadoran military forces murdered 6 Jesuit priests, drawing more condemnation from the international community. After a month of fighting, the offensive ended with both sides claiming a victory. This offensive, coming on the heels of the end of the Cold War in Europe, perhaps hastened peace negotiations with both sides, which eventually happened 2 years later. The Psychopath of Chalchuapa. Hugo Osorio, also known as the Psychopath of Chalchuapa, is a retired police officer who became a violent serial killer. Most of his victims were women and young girls, with him telling that he would offer immigration to the United States, employment, or romantic dates. Once he would arrive to his home in Chalchuapa near Santa Ana, they would be subdued with an iron pipe, raped, murdered, and their bodies dug in shallow clandestine graves. It was said that during his 3-year-long murder spree, Osorio and his accomplices claimed 14 to 40 innocent women's lives. In one instance, Osorio was paid $7,000 by a woman so her son could immigrate to the United States in search of better opportunities. Once Osorio claimed that her son was kidnapped, the mother and her daughter went to Osorio's residence to find out what happened to her son. Osorio would then strike them in the head, instantly killing them. When police descended upon his property in May 2021, Osorio pretended to play dead by cutting his veins and throwing himself on his victims' bodies. However, Osorio was arrested and confessed to the murders. After a year-long investigation, Osorio was sentenced to 70 years in prison in June 2022. Human rights experts and activists have used this to bring attention to the issue of increased disappearances and femicides in El Salvador and Latin America in general. Katia Miranda. In April 1999, Katia Miranda, a 9-year-old Salvadoran girl, was on vacation with her family at their beach property in La Paz department. On the morning of the 4th of April, Katia's body was found lifeless. She had been raped and suffocated with sand until she lost consciousness. What makes this even more mysterious and insidious is the fact that her family members, including the key suspects, were high-ranking members of the Army, National Civil Police, and Presidential Guard staff. In January 2000, after an intense forensics test, Katia's father, grandfather, and the 2 workers who encountered her body were arrested and charged with murder. However, due to a lack of evidence, all charges were dropped and the defendants were exonerated. The Miranda family would continue to search for answers on what happened to little Katia with hired private investigators. In 2009, the case was reopened, with prosecutors accusing Katia's grandfather, Carlos Miranda, of kidnapping. He was found guilty of the charge and sentenced to 13 years in prison, but only served 3 years due to a Supreme Court of Justice decision claiming that he was prosecuted twice for the same crime. Carlos Miranda passed away in 2018. This case has become infamous in El Salvador as an example of judicial impunity, and questions continue to spiral regarding what happened to Katia Miranda. Mexicanos Massacre of 2010. On the evening of June 20th, 2010, in the municipality of Mexicanos near San Salvador, Barrio 18 gang members committed a terrorist attack against a civilian bus with 32 people aboard. This minibus was making its usual trip on Route 47 towards the capital. They opened fire on the bus before promptly dousing the bus in gasoline and lighting it on fire while the bus attendants were still alive. All in all, 17 people were killed and 15 were wounded in the attack. People witnessing the blazing bus could only describe the horrors of screams of innocent people being burned alive. Then President Mauricio Funes described it as an act of terror, with a national manhunt declared for the men responsible for the attack. The government managed to capture 8 attackers and accomplices, charging them with terrorism. Murder of Rock Dalton. Rock Dalton was a Salvadoran poet and activist who became infatuated with Marxist socialism while studying law at the University of Santiago in Chile, where he would start establishing relationships with other communist intellectuals. He had an extensive self-written collection of poetry which delved into politics, life, death, and love. In the 1950s, he helped found the University Literary Circle and got involved in Salvadoran politics. Dalton would be in prison for inciting revolts against landowners in 1959. He subsequently moved to Cuba, where he continued his communist activism in exile. Dalton returned to El Salvador in the 1960s, sentenced to be executed, but escaped after an earthquake damaged his cell wall. He returned to Cuba and was sent to Prague by the Communist Party, where he continued to write poetry regarding his communist activism and life story. Dalton would once again become involved in Salvadoran communist politics, this time joining the People's Revolutionary Army, or ERP. However, a military faction of the ERP, led by Joaquin Villalobos, accused him of trying to divide their organization. This faction also accused Dalton of being an asset for the CIA, an ideological death sentence. Thus, on the 10th of May 1975, the ERP condemned Dalton to death. He was shot to death in San Salvador 4 days before his 40th birthday. The ERP would go on to be one of the pivotal organizations in the creation of the FMLN militant group during the Civil War. Dalton left behind an extensive poetry collection and novel, making him one of Latin America's most famous poets.
Los siempre sospechosos de todo. Me permito remitirle al imperfecto por esquinero sospechoso, ¡ja! Y con el agravante de ser salvadoreño. Derribete santaneco, para variar del barrio La Cruz. Derribete migueleño, para variar del milagro de la paz. Las que llenaron los bares y burdeles de todos los puertos, haciendas y capitales de la zona. Los sembradores de maíz en plena selva extranjera. Los que lloraron borrachos por el himno nacional bajo el ciclón del Pacífico o las nieves del norte. Los primeros en sacar el cuchillo. Los reyes de la página roja. Los que nunca saben nadie de dónde son. Los mejores arates paisanos del mundo, los que murieron de paludismo en el infierno de las bananeras. Los arrimados, los mendigos, los marihuaneros, guanacos, hijos de puta, eternos indocumentados, los hacelo todo, los véndelo todo, los cómelo todo, los tristes más tristes del mundo, mis compatriotas, mis hermanos. Los arrimados, los mendigos, los marihuaneros, guanacos, hijos de puta, eternos indocumentados, los hacelo todo, los véndelo todo, los cómelo todo, los tristes más tristes del mundo, mis compatriotas, mis hermanos.
Hey everyone, this is Bruce Snoop. Thanks for watching The Iceberg. I actually had a lot of fun making this, and I do apologize for not uploading these past 2 years. I know I've been in college, I just graduated, so I had a lot on my plate, but you'll be seeing more of me soon. Special thanks to Cream Man for helping me proofread the script to make sure that everything flowed very well, and I must thank everyone for their support and their patience during this process. If you'd like to see more videos about El Salvador and Latin America in general, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. Thanks everyone, and have a blessed rest of your day or night. Bruce Snoop out.